The relationship between Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney represents one of the most fascinating and ultimately tragic stories in music history. What began as a genuine friendship between two of the world's most celebrated artists would eventually transform into a cold business transaction that forever altered the landscape of music publishing and left lasting wounds that never fully healed. The story of how Michael Jackson acquired the Beatles catalog is not merely a tale of corporate maneuvering, but a complex narrative that touches on themes of trust, ambition, racial dynamics in the music industry, and the inevitable tension between art and commerce. In the early 1980s, few would have predicted that the king of pop and a former Beatle would develop such a close personal relationship. Michael Jackson, fresh off his groundbreaking success with Off the Wall, was establishing himself as a solo superstar after years as the frontman of the Jackson 5. Paul McCartney, meanwhile, had spent over a decade building his post-Beatles career with Wings and as a solo artist. Despite coming from vastly different backgrounds and generations, the two musicians found common ground in their shared passion for melody, harmony, and the craft of songwriting. Their professional collaboration began with The Girl Is Mine in 1982, a playful duet that showcased both artists' vocal abilities while maintaining a light, almost competitive spirit between the two singers. The song was a commercial success, but more importantly, it marked the beginning of a creative partnership that seemed natural and effortless. A year later, they reunited for Say Say Say, which became an even bigger global hit and demonstrated the genuine chemistry between Jackson's smooth delivery and McCartney's melodic sensibilities. However, it was the time spent between recording sessions that would prove most significant for the future of both artists' careers. During these private conversations, McCartney shared insights about the business side of music that went far beyond the typical discussions of recording techniques or creative processes. As someone who had learned hard lessons about music publishing during his Beatles years, McCartney had become increasingly sophisticated about the financial mechanisms that drove the industry. He had quietly built an impressive portfolio of music publishing rights, acquiring songs by artists ranging from Buddy Holly to various Broadway composers. McCartney's approach to music publishing was methodical and strategic. He understood that while album sales and concert tours provided immediate income, owning the publishing rights to songs created long-term, passive revenue streams that could continue generating income for decades. According to various accounts, McCartney even showed Jackson a notebook containing details of songs he owned, explaining how these investments provided financial security regardless of his own recording or touring activities. To McCartney, this was simply friendly advice between colleagues, the kind of wisdom that successful artists might naturally share with one another. For Jackson, however, these conversations represented something far more profound than casual business tips. Having grown up in the music industry from childhood, first with the Jackson 5 and later as a solo artist, Michael had witnessed firsthand how artists could be exploited by record labels, managers, and other industry gatekeepers. The idea of ownership, of having control over valuable musical assets, resonated with him on multiple levels. It wasn't just about financial gain, though that was certainly appealing. It was about power, influence, and the ability to shape his own destiny within an industry that had often treated performers as disposable commodities. The seeds planted during these conversations would soon find fertile ground when circumstances in the music publishing world created an unprecedented opportunity. The Beatles catalog, along with thousands of other valuable songs, was controlled by ATV Music, a company that had acquired Northern Songs, the original publisher of Lennon-McCartney compositions. The Beatles themselves had lost control of their publishing rights early in their career, a common practice at the time that many artists would later regret. Over the years, these rights had changed hands multiple times through various corporate transactions, eventually ending up as part of ATV's extensive catalog. By the mid-1980s, ATV Music had become a valuable but unwieldy asset for its owner, Australian businessman Robert Holmes à Court. Holmes à Court was known for his aggressive corporate acquisitions and his willingness to sell assets when the price was right. When word began circulating in industry circles that the ATV catalog might be available for purchase, it set off a chain of events that would culminate in one of the most significant deals in music history. Michael Jackson, riding high on the unprecedented success of Thriller, was in a unique position to make a serious bid for the catalog. Thriller had not only become the best-selling album of all time, but it also generated enormous cash flow that gave Jackson the financial resources to pursue major investments. More importantly, his earlier conversations with McCartney had given him a clear understanding of the strategic value of music publishing. When his advisors suggested exploring publishing investments, Jackson was already primed to recognize the opportunity that ATV represented. The decision to pursue the Beatles catalog was not made lightly. Jackson assembled a team of experienced lawyers and business advisors, led by entertainment attorney John Branca, who had a reputation for aggressive deal-making in the music industry. When Jackson instructed his team to begin negotiations for the ATV catalog, his intentions were clear and uncompromising. He wanted total ownership, was prepared to pay cash, and would not accept partial deals or licensing arrangements that might limit his control. The bidding process that followed was unlike anything the music industry had seen before. Word of the potential sale attracted interest from billionaires, media moguls, and corporate entities who recognized the immense value of the catalog. The Beatles songs alone would have justified significant investment, but the ATV catalog contained thousands of other valuable compositions spanning multiple decades and genres. Initial offers started around $20 million, but quickly escalated as serious bidders emerged. What made Jackson's bid particularly formidable was not just his financial resources, but his strategic approach. While other bidders might have been interested in the catalog as one of many investments, Jackson understood the specific value of music, publishing in ways that many corporate buyers did not. His team was prepared to move quickly and decisively, without the bureaucratic delays that might slow down larger corporate entities. The final stages of the bidding war were particularly intense. Holmes A. Court was an experienced negotiator who understood exactly what he was selling and was determined to maximize his return. As bids climbed past $30 and then $40 million, many potential buyers began to drop out. The complexity of valuing a music catalog, combined with the enormous sums involved, made this a deal that only the most serious and well-funded parties could pursue. When Jackson's final offer of $47.5 million was accepted in 1985, it represented far more than a simple business transaction. In one move, Jackson had acquired control of some of the most valuable and culturally significant music ever created. The catalog included not only Beatles compositions like Hey Jude, Yesterday, and Let It Be, but also songs by Elvis Presley, Little Richard, and numerous other legendary artists. The deal gave Jackson immediate control over a revenue stream that would generate millions of dollars annually through radio play, licensing for films and commercials, and cover versions by other artists. Perhaps most significantly, Jackson had completed this acquisition without informing Paul McCartney, the man who had originally educated him about the value of music publishing. From Jackson's perspective, this may have seemed like a straightforward business decision. The catalog was openly for sale, he had the resources to acquire it, and he was simply following the advice McCartney had given him about the importance of ownership in the music industry. For McCartney, however, the news came as a profound shock that felt deeply personal. Learning that his former collaborator and friend had acquired the rights to his own compositions without even informing him was devastating on multiple levels. These weren't just valuable assets. They were songs that McCartney had written with John Lennon, pieces of his creative soul that now belonged to someone else. The financial implications were significant, as McCartney would now have to pay royalties to Jackson for the use of his own compositions. But the emotional impact was far greater. McCartney's reaction revealed the depth of his feelings about both the music and the relationship. In subsequent interviews, he didn't hide his sense of betrayal and disappointment. He felt that Jackson had taken advantage of information shared in friendship to gain leverage over his musical legacy. The fact that Jackson had never given him advance warning or the opportunity to make a counteroffer made the situation even more painful. McCartney's attempts to reach out to Jackson after the deal was completed were reportedly met with cool responses and the simple explanation that it was just business. The phrase "just business" encapsulated the fundamental disconnect between how the two artists viewed the situation. For Jackson, the acquisition represented a strategic investment based on sound business principles that McCartney himself had articulated. For McCartney, it represented a violation of trust and friendship that reduced deeply personal artistic creations to mere financial instruments. The fact that both perspectives contained elements of truth made the conflict all the more tragic and irreconcilable. From a business standpoint, Jackson's acquisition of the ATV catalog was indeed brilliant. The deal provided him with immediate financial benefits and long-term security that few artists ever achieved. The catalog generated consistent revenue regardless of Jackson's own recording or touring activities, providing a buffer against the unpredictable nature of the entertainment industry. Moreover, ownership of such valuable publishing rights gave Jackson significant influence within the music industry, elevating him from performer to power broker. The strategic value of the acquisition became even more apparent in the years following the initial purchase. Jackson's control over the Beatles catalog, combined with the thousands of other songs in the ATV collection, made him one of the most powerful figures in music publishing. This influence extended far beyond simple revenue generation. It gave Jackson leverage in negotiations with record labels, media companies, and other industry players who needed access to the songs he controlled. In the mid-1990s, Jackson demonstrated the full extent of his business acumen by agreeing to merge ATV with Sony's publishing division. This created Sony ATV, one of the largest music publishing companies in the world, with Jackson retaining a significant ownership stake while gaining access to Sony's global distribution and marketing capabilities. The deal was valued at hundreds of millions of dollars and solidified Jackson's position as a major force in the industry. However, the success of Jackson's publishing empire came at considerable personal cost. The relationship with McCartney never recovered from the ATV acquisition. The two artists, who had once seemed destined for a long creative partnership, never collaborated again. The friendship that had produced global hits was permanently damaged by a business transaction that, regardless of its financial merits, had violated the trust and mutual respect that had made their creative relationship possible. The broader implications of Jackson's move extended far beyond his personal relationships. The acquisition highlighted the often uncomfortable relationship between artistic creation and commercial exploitation that has long characterized the music industry. It demonstrated how songs, regardless of their cultural significance or emotional resonance, could be treated as purely financial assets to be bought and sold like any other commodity. The deal also had significant implications for how artists began to think about their own work and careers. Jackson's success in acquiring such valuable publishing rights served as a wake-up call for many performers who had never fully understood the long-term value of owning their compositions. The transaction helped spark a broader awareness among artists about the importance of retaining control over their intellectual property, leading to more sophisticated approaches to recording contracts and publishing deals. From a cultural perspective, the story of Jackson's acquisition of the Beatles catalog raises complex questions about ownership, legacy, and power within the music industry. The fact that a black artist had gained control over the catalog of what many considered the most important white rock band in history was not lost on observers who understood the racial dynamics that had long shaped popular music. For decades, black artists had seen their innovations appropriated and commercialized by white performers who often received greater recognition and financial rewards. Jackson's acquisition of the Beatles catalog could be seen as a form of historical justice, even if that was not necessarily his primary motivation. The racial dimensions of the story become even more complex when considering the broader context of Jackson's career in the music industry of the 1980s. Jackson had already broken down numerous barriers, becoming the first black artist to receive heavy rotation on MTV and achieving levels of mainstream success that few artists of any race had matched. His acquisition of the Beatles catalog represented another form of barrier breaking, demonstrating that black artists could be not just performers but also owners and controllers of valuable cultural assets. Yet the personal cost of Jackson's business success remained significant. The loss of his friendship with McCartney was just one example of how the pressures of commerce and competition could damage relationships within the music community. As Jackson's financial situation became more complicated in later years, the publishing catalog became both a source of security and a target for creditors and business partners seeking to gain control over his assets. The long-term consequences of the ATV deal continued to unfold long after the initial transaction. Following Jackson's death in 2009, control of his publishing interests became a matter of intense legal and financial scrutiny. His estate eventually sold portions of the catalog, including the 50% stake in Sony ATV, back to Sony for hundreds of millions of dollars. Meanwhile, changes in copyright law eventually allowed McCartney to begin the process of reclaiming some rights to his original compositions, though this process took decades to implement and remained incomplete. The story of Michael Jackson's acquisition of the Beatles catalog ultimately serves as a cautionary tale about the complex relationships between friendship, business, and artistic legacy in the music industry. It demonstrates how even the most successful and sophisticated artists can find themselves caught between competing loyalties and interests, forced to choose between personal relationships and professional opportunities. The question of whether Jackson's actions constituted betrayal, genius, or something more nuanced continues to generate debate among music industry observers and fans. Those who view the transaction as justified point to the fact that the catalog was openly for sale, that Jackson followed McCartney's own advice about the importance of publishing ownership, and that he made a legitimate business decision based on publicly available information. From this perspective, any sense of betrayal was misplaced, as Jackson was simply participating in the same commercial system that had always governed the music industry. Others argue that Jackson's failure to inform McCartney of his intentions combined with the personal nature of their friendship and the specific advice McCartney had provided, created ethical obligations that went beyond simple business considerations. The fact that Jackson acquired control over songs that McCartney had co-written and that held deep personal significance for him added layers of complexity that made this more than just a routine commercial transaction. Perhaps the most accurate assessment is that Jackson's acquisition of the Beatles catalog was simultaneously brilliant and damaging, strategically sound and personally hurtful, legally justified and ethically questionable. The transaction succeeded in achieving Jackson's apparent goals of financial security and industry influence, while permanently damaging a valuable creative relationship and highlighting the often uncomfortable tensions between art and commerce that characterize the modern music industry. The legacy of this deal continues to influence how artists, managers, and industry executives approach questions of ownership, collaboration, and competition. It serves as a reminder that in an industry where personal relationships and business interests are often intertwined, the consequences of strategic decisions can extend far beyond their immediate financial impact. The story of Michael Jackson and the Beatles catalog remains one of the most compelling and complex narratives in music history, a tale that illuminates both the possibilities and the perils of success in the modern entertainment industry.